change the way worshippers pray at the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound. It goes against Israel's claims of maintaining the status quo at the sacred and sensitive site in Jerusalem. So is it a recipe for more tension in the occupied Palestinian territories? This is Inside Story. Hello there and a warm welcome to the programme. I'm Laura Kyle. Rising unrest in the occupied Palestinian territories is raising fears of a prolonged period of instability. 4 Israelis and 4 Palestinians have been killed in recent days. The latest, a 13-year-old boy shot in the chest by Israeli security forces in a refugee camp in Bethlehem. Israel has imposed more security measures to deal with growing unrest, including demolishing the homes of attack suspects and the broader use of detention without trial. Violence has increased as tensions rise at the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound, the site in the old city of Jerusalem, known to Jews as well as the Temple Mount. Now, before we bring in our guests, here's Mike Hanna explaining what's at stake from the Calandia crossing in the occupied West Bank.
Well, the status quo can be summed up in one word, and that is occupation. But under the Netanyahu government, occupation has intensified. Settlement growth in the occupied West Bank has spiraled, and the settler movement, which a decade ago was nothing but a fringe organization in Israeli society, has now become the dominant force in the Netanyahu government. And it's a settler movement, many analysts believe, who are advocating a change in the status quo on what Jews call the Temple Mount, the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound. Settler movements are advocating free access to that particular site in defiance of the laws laid down by Israel's supreme religious body. They are calling for the rebuilding of the third temple on the site of the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound. And one organization that has drawn up plans for this, the Temple Mount Institute, is directly funded to the tune of $100,000 a year by the Netanyahu government. Not only that, but a member of Netanyahu's cabinet has publicly advocated the building of a new temple on the site of the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound. 15 years ago, Ariel Sharon walked on that compound. He sparked off the Second Intifada. At the same time, his popularity soared and he got over 70% of support and became an Israeli prime minister. Some are arguing that the settler movement is looking for its Sharon moment. Mike Hanna, Inside Story, Calandia Checkpoint, Ramallah.
So plenty to discuss today. Let's bring in our guests to do so. In Chicago, we have Ali Abu Nima, co-founder of Electronic Intifada. In Philadelphia, Greg Roman, director of the Middle East Forum and former Ministry of Defense official in Israel. And in London, Ian Black, Middle East editor for The Guardian. Thank you all very much for joining us and welcome to Inside Story. Ali, if I might start with you and begin the discussion focusing on the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound. Are we seeing a creeping change to the status quo, that delicate balance that has allowed Jews and Muslims to live side by side?
I think Mike Hanna laid it out very well. We are seeing not just a gradual change, but a very aggressive change. Let's remember that the entire Haram al-Sharif, the Temple Mount, is part of occupied East Jerusalem. Under international law, which I know Israel doesn't respect or feel it's bound by, under international law, Israel cannot change the status of these territories. It cannot change the institutions. But what is very worrying indeed, as Mike Hanna laid out, is the free rein the Israeli government is giving to groups like the Temple Institute, whose head, Rabbi Israel Ariel, just last month praised the killers, the settlers who burned a Palestinian family to death in the West Bank. Rabbi Ariel also last month called for President Barack Obama to be killed because of his supposed crimes against the Jewish people. This is the Temple Institute that is funded by the Israeli government, that is behind so much of the incitement, the violence and the fears of Palestinians, that Israel's ultimate goal is indeed the destruction of Al-Aqsa, and, as several Israeli government ministers have advocated, the construction in its place of a Jewish temple.
Greg, do you agree with that, or to what extent do you agree with that, that we are seeing aggressive attempts by this group to make changes at Al-Aqsa Mosque compound?
So the first thing you have to do is differentiate between the policy of the Israeli government and the policy of the Temple Institute. If Israel wanted to take over the Al-Aqsa Mosque, they could drop a 500-pound bomb on the Haram al-Sharif, take it over, clean the presence of any Palestinian areas, and build a third temple. They haven't done that yet, and that's indicative of the fact that they're not willing to do it. When Israel has a policy goal, they set it, and they're able to accomplish it. However, we have to look at the fine minutiae of who the Israeli government actually funds. I think that what we have to be able to see here is that if we have the Israeli government not just funding institutions like the Temple Institute and including members of its cabinet like Uri Ariel inside of its decision-making apparatus, you also have the Israeli government funding mosques in the Wadi Ara and members of Knesset from the Arab list who are calling for the destruction of Israel. So there are some funding mechanisms which may be used by the Israeli government in terms of its ability to have freedom of religion, freedom of democracy, but there also are some other areas that we're trying to be able to find without having this access.
I think, Greg, Ali's just trying to make the point there that the particular institute here, the Temple Institute, is calling for the destruction of Al-Aqsa, and that's the problem with the Israeli government funding it.
Right. Well, I think that the funding of the Institute is more of a heritage issue rather than it is the political positions of its head. You have to differentiate between the activities of what the Institute does itself in the Cardo in Jerusalem, trying to allow access to the Temple Mount for freedom of religion from the ability to go up there and pray. However, what you see is the Islamic Waqf employing individuals, not just disrupting Jews that are trying to go to its heritage area from the last 3,000 years, but also interrupting tourists that are going there. You had a member of Congress, Keith Rothfuss, visit the Temple Mount in the middle of August with a delegation of 3 other congressmen. You had Palestinian Authority and Islamic Waqf employees chase them off the Temple Mount, violating their ability to conduct their freedom of religion, trying to see where the birthplace of Judaism took place from, just because of political means. Even more than that, the Palestinian policy of stockpiling fireworks and rocks to rain down terror on individuals that are trying to visit there, and even employing individuals to shadow people there trying to limit their freedom of movement is indicative that the Palestinian Authority, Hamas, the Islamic Jihad, and other organizations are using this as a political move rather than one which is the what is not going to happen, which is the destruction of the Al-Aqsa Mosque. That is not on the table here.
Okay, Greg.
It's a conspiracy
can I bring you
theory,
in
and it should be
at
left
this
at that.
point? Can you, just for our viewers for a moment, I mean, clearly we see from our two guests here that this is a very controversial topic. Can you explain why Al-Aqsa Mosque compound is such a sensitive site?
The Al-Aqsa Mosque is a sensitive site because it's the third holiest site in Islam after the two holy cities of Mecca and Medina in Saudi Arabia. And for Jews, of course, it's the site, as they believe, of the Jewish temple. That makes for a very, very toxic combination. It was managed for many years throughout the Ottoman Empire, even throughout the British Mandate period, with a status quo that held. Occasionally, when it didn't, there were outbreaks of serious trouble. Most notably, people will know back in 1929, the famous disturbances of that year, which focused on the issue of the Wailing Wall, the western wall of the Jewish temple, which is, of course, adjacent to the Haram al-Sharif. So these are two religious claims. They're not really reconcilable, and when attempts have been made to deal with them politically, as was the case in the negotiations over the Oslo Agreement in 1993, it wasn't possible. So the status quo has held. The question now is,
Ali, okay.
The question now
Let's Ali jump in there. Why don't you agree with that, with what Ian's saying?
Can the status quo?
I mean, a couple of things. First of all, you know, Greg Roman and I actually agreed on something. he doesn't dispute that the Israeli government funds the Temple Institute. All he's trying to tell viewers is, look, it's no big deal that the Israeli government funds these extremists who want to destroy Al-Aqsa. Now, he talks about rocks and fireworks. Let's actually look at what Palestinians are afraid of. Remember that in 1967, June 1967, when Israel occupied East Jerusalem, the first thing it did was destroy the Mughrabi, the Moroccan quarter, in order to create what is now the Western Wall Plaza, which is considered one of the most revered sites for Jewish people. When it destroyed the Mughrabi quarter, it also destroyed one of the most ancient mosques in Jerusalem. So we're not talking about fanciful imagination. We're talking about real things that have happened. You look at what happened in Hebron after the massacre by the American settler Baruch Goldstein. What did Israel do? It used that massacre as an excuse to go in and take over most of the Ibrahimi mosque in Hebron and hand it over to Israeli settlers. So this is what Palestinians are afraid of. And with all respect, I don't agree with Ian Black that these things are irreconcilable. If it was a matter of access for religious communities, as he said, that has been managed for centuries. Muslims, Christians, and Jews had access to Jerusalem. What is causing the problem is Israel's violent and aggressive colonization of Jerusalem and more broadly the West Bank.
I want to bring you in here.
And it's claimed that it alone should control everything.
We could just let Greg respond to your fears. Are they realistic? Right. Is the destruction of Al-Aqsa Mosque imminent with the arrival of these Jewish settler groups, these Jewish activist groups coming onto the compound?
Imminent.
Okay, but is it a possibility then?
Mr. Abu Nima sounds, it's not a possibility. Mr. Abu Nima sounds more like a spokesperson for the Palestinian Islamic Jihad when he uses these vile accusations of the Judaization of Jerusalem.
Well, personal insults don't get you out of the facts.
He has a very short memory. When we look at 1967, or the time period between 1948 to 1967, the illegal occupation of Jerusalem by the Jordanian government violated the UN resolution that established the State of Israel. There were supposed to be shared use of religious sites. There was supposed to be shared residency between the Islamic areas, between the Christian areas, between the Jewish areas, and between the Armenian areas. I think that the bottom line of what we're looking at here is that Mr. Abu Nima has a problem with the freedom of religion and the freedom of movement.
He's
using these accusations which have been disproven time and time again.
Throwing around insults, let's just stick and try to move forward in this discussion. Ian, this is clearly a very sensitive site. So why are these groups being allowed access to the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound? Why are they being allowed to tour when it's creating such provocation?
Well, I think the simple answer to that is that over the last 20, particularly the last 10 years, you've seen a process where politics in Israel have drifted steadily to the right. You currently have the most right-wing government in Israeli history. You also have, paradoxically, liberal elements in Israeli society, one of which produced an excellent report that I suspect we're all referring to without having yet cited it, by Ir Amim, which is a progressive Israeli body which focuses on the situation in Jerusalem. And it has a very long 70-page, pretty comprehensively documented report about the temple movement organizations and their links with the Israeli government. And it makes the very accurate point that 20 years or so ago, these kind of organizations were on the radical fringes of Israeli Jewish society. And over that